There is a question that almost every man has whispered to himself at least once, usually alone, usually in silence, usually somewhere private where no one else could hear the thought. It is a question rarely spoken out loud, yet it quietly shapes confidence, relationships, and even the way some men see their own worth. Am I normal? That single question, so private and so common at the same time, has more scientific nuance behind it than most people ever realize. And by the end of this video, you will understand not just the numbers behind it, but the psychology, the biology, and the misunderstood beliefs that have shaped how men think about their bodies for generations. To understand this properly, we have to start somewhere unexpected. Not with measurements, not with statistics, but with the brain. Because before there is any physical answer to this question, there is a mental one. Human beings are wired to compare. It is one of the oldest survival instincts we carry, built into us long before modern life existed. In ancient environments, comparison helped humans judge strength, health, and reproductive fitness at a glance. That instinct never disappeared. It simply changed shape. Today, instead of comparing hunting skills or physical stamina, many men unconsciously compare something far more private, often shaped by unrealistic references rather than reality. That is where the story usually begins. Long before puberty, before any real biological development takes place, cultural messaging quietly plants a number in the mind. A number that feels like a target, even though it was never based on scientific reality. Where does that number come from? Mostly from media, entertainment, and casual conversation, not from clinical research. And this creates one of the most common misunderstandings in male health today, a gap between perceived normal and actual normal that can be strikingly wide. So let's ground this in real science. Genetics is the primary architect of penile development. Just as height, foot size, or shoulder width are shaped predominantly by inherited genetic blueprints, penile length follows a similar biological pattern. However, genetics does not act alone. Hormonal signaling, particularly testosterone and its interaction with androgen receptors during fetal development and puberty, plays a critical supporting role. If hormonal signaling is disrupted during key developmental windows, it can influence growth patterns. This is why certain medical conditions affecting hormone production during childhood are sometimes associated with atypical development, though such cases represent a small percentage of the population, not the average experience. Beyond genetics and hormones, there is a third, often overlooked contributor: environment. Chronic health conditions later in life, such as high blood pressure, diabetes, or vascular disease, do not typically alter genetic structure, but they can influence blood flow, which affects size perception and function over time. This is an important distinction many people miss. The body you're born with and the body you maintain are connected, but they are not identical stories. One is written by inheritance, the other is shaped by lifestyle, circulation, and long-term cardiovascular health. Now here is where curiosity deepens, because measuring this part of the body scientifically is far more complicated than people assume. Size is not a fixed number. It fluctuates. Cold temperature, anxiety, stress hormones, arousal state, even hydration levels can cause noticeable variation within the very same body on different days. This is why self-measurement, especially under inconsistent conditions, often produces wildly different results than clinical measurement. It is one of the most misunderstood aspects of male anatomy, the assumption that there is one single true number, when in reality, there is a natural range influenced by physiology in the moment. So what does real clinical data actually say? To answer that with any credibility, researchers didn't rely on a single small study. Instead, one of the most comprehensive analyses ever conducted combined data from 20 separate studies, encompassing more than 15,000 men across different countries and populations. This wasn't guesswork. It was structured, physician-measured data, specifically designed to remove the bias that comes from self-reported numbers, because when people measure themselves, especially in a culture that values size, numbers tend to drift upward, not because of dishonesty, but because of unconscious rounding and psychological bias. In this large-scale analysis, researchers measured multiple states: flaccid length, stretched length, and in some cases erect length, along with circumference at both the base and mid-shaft. Interestingly, stretched length, when performed correctly by a trained examiner, closely mirrors erect length in most cases, which allows researchers to gather meaningful data without requiring induced erections in clinical settings. So here are the numbers, the ones almost never discussed with actual scientific context. Average flaccid length measured in relaxed clinical conditions came out to roughly 3.6 inches. When measuring stretched or erect length, the global average landed between 5.1 and 5.2 inches. For circumference, the average ranged between approximately 3.6 and 4.6 inches around, depending on measurement technique and population sampled. These are not outlier numbers. These represent a broad, statistically validated average drawn from real clinical environments, not internet forums, not adult entertainment, and not casual assumption. Now here is the moment where perception and reality truly collide. Multiple independent surveys asking men what they believe the average size to be consistently reveal a number significantly higher than actual clinical averages, often estimated closer to 6 inches or more. This creates a powerful psychological effect known in behavioral science as a false consensus distortion, where individuals assume their perception of normal aligns with a widely accepted truth, even when that belief has little grounding in actual population data. In simpler terms, an enormous number of men are quietly comparing themselves to a number that was never real to begin with. This misunderstanding doesn't just live in private thought, it echoes into real emotional consequences. Research in psychological and sexual health fields has repeatedly linked size-related insecurity to reduced sexual confidence, anxiety during intimacy, and in some cases, avoidance of relationships altogether. Interestingly, many of these psychological effects occur independent of actual physical measurement, meaning a person can fall precisely within a completely normal, healthy range and still experience significant emotional distress simply because their internal benchmark was built on a distorted cultural standard rather than medical reality. This raises an important and often ignored question. If perception, not biology, is driving so much of this anxiety, then shouldn't the conversation shift? And that shift becomes even more meaningful once we bring pleasure and intimacy into the picture. Because that is the most surprising insight of this entire topic lives. Sexual pleasure, particularly for female partners, is overwhelmingly centered around the clitoris, an organ that is developmentally and anatomically similar to the penis, forming from the same embryonic tissue during early human development. Despite its central role in pleasure, much of the clitoris remains internal, hidden beneath the surface, which historically led to it being widely misunderstood or underrepresented in both medical education and mainstream conversation. This single biological fact quietly dismantles one of the most persistent cultural myths, that size is the primary driver of sexual satisfaction. Multiple studies in sexual health research consistently point toward factors like emotional connection, communication, technique, and understanding of anatomy as stronger predictors of sexual satisfaction than size alone. This is not a dismissal of physical concerns, and it is not meant to suggest that physical body awareness doesn't matter. It simply reframes where genuine value lies. When something is misunderstood for long enough, it can dominate self-image far beyond its actual biological significance. Recognizing this doesn't diminish physical health awareness, it redirects focus toward things that are actually within a person's control and actually meaningful to overall well-being. And this brings us to lifestyle, because while genetics primarily shapes structural size, health choices influence appearance, function, and confidence in very real ways. Body composition plays a noticeable visual role. Excess fat around the lower abdominal region can partially cover the base of the penis, making it visually appear shorter than its actual structural length. This is why healthy weight management, through balanced nutrition and physical activity, can influence visible proportion without altering the body's underlying anatomy. This is not about chasing an aesthetic ideal. It is about understanding a physiological relationship between body fat distribution and visual perception. Similarly, grooming choices such as trimming surrounding hair can influence visual length perception simply by removing coverage, not by altering biology. These small, low-risk lifestyle choices highlight an important truth. Some aspects of confidence can be influenced without needing to change anything structural at all. Beyond aesthetics, cardiovascular health carries long-term significance that deserves far more attention than surface-level concerns. Blood flow is fundamental to both function and sensation. Conditions like high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, and chronic stress can gradually impact vascular health, which in turn can influence blood flow-dependent function over time. This means that habits supporting heart health, regular movement, balanced nutrition, adequate sleep, and stress regulation aren't just general wellness advice, they are directly connected to long-term reproductive and sexual health outcomes. Testosterone also deserves context here, not as a size-determining factor in adulthood, but as a regulator of energy, mood, libido, and overall vitality. Natural testosterone levels tend to shift gradually with age, and lifestyle factors like sleep quality, resistance exercise, and stress management can meaningfully support hormonal balance within a healthy, natural range. This is not about chasing extremes, it is about understanding how interconnected the body truly is. There is also a psychological ripple effect worth understanding. When people carry chronic insecurity about a private aspect of their body, that insecurity often doesn't stay contained. It can influence communication, confidence, and openness in relationships. Research in psychology consistently shows that self-perception, not just physical reality, strongly shapes emotional intimacy and communication comfort. This means that addressing misinformation isn't only a matter of correcting a statistic, it can meaningfully support emotional well-being and relationship confidence over time. So here is the deeper truth this topic quietly reveals. So much of the anxiety surrounding this subject was never really about biology in the first place. It was about comparison to an invented standard, reinforced by media, silence, and cultural assumption rather than clinical fact. Once that standard is replaced with real evidence-based understanding, something interesting tends to happen. The emotional weight around the topic often becomes lighter, because the number that once felt threatening was never actually representative of most people to begin with. This is a pattern that echoes across many aspects of human health, not just this one. Anxiety often grows in the space where accurate information is missing. Confidence tends to grow where understanding replaces assumption. That single principle applies far beyond anatomy. It applies to how people relate to their skin, their weight, their aging process, and nearly every aspect of physical identity shaped by comparison rather than fact. So the next time this question quietly surfaces in someone's mind, the more powerful response isn't chasing a number pulled from media or assumption. It's understanding that variation is the biological norm, not the exception, and that meaningful confidence and connection are built on far more than a single measurement. Perhaps the most valuable shift isn't in the body at all, but in how honestly we choose to understand it.